So good afternoon and welcome to the panel Preparing Cryptography for the Quantum Age. My name is Laima Janđci. I am a postdoctoral researcher at the Institute for Information Law at the University of Amsterdam, and I have a pleasure to moderate this panel today. So to set the scene a little bit, there's this assumption that one day soon there might be quantum computers powerful enough to make public key encryption obsolete, in that they will be able to decrypt encrypted messages, and that would compromise information networks and data privacy. And that raises a series of implications that we would like to discuss today. So on that note, let me present to you the excellent lineup of speakers. So to my left, there is Westerbaan, a research engineer at CloudFlare. Then there is Rossi. Rossi is a cryptographic researcher at the French cybersecurity agency, ANSSI. And next to Melissa, there is van Daalen, who's a researcher at the Institute for Information Law, University of Amsterdam. And we also have one panelist joining us remotely today, Tanja Lange, who is a full professor at the Technical University of Eindhoven. We first are going to hear from the panelists, and then at the end we are going to have a Q&A session. So with that, let me give the floor to Tanja, who will talk us through what are the risks of quantum computing to public key encryption.
Yeah, so I always have to watch out that I'm not talking too techie-like, so please interrupt me if it's incomprehensible. And I'll already start with kind of rephrasing the question a little bit, because public key cryptography is not what you normally hear people speaking about. What you want to achieve is security. You want to achieve confidentiality. So we have two people talking, say you're sending an email to somebody else, and you want to make sure that nobody who's sitting in the middle of this can actually understand what's going on. I need to go a little bit into the technological depths, because the way that these two people can talk does involve different flavors of cryptography. And so at the beginning of each conversation, these two people need to establish this channel. And at that moment, something comes in, which in technological terms is called public key encryption. And the systems that we are using for that at this moment, and you can find out, say, when you click on your browser, up there's this log, and you can ask it for like, hey, what are you doing right now? And then it's going to give you some gibberish, some 3 or 4 letter abbreviations. And if those include the 3 letters RSA or something with EC, standing for elliptic curves, those are the public key systems. And it's an unfortunate sort of side effect of quantum computers, or development of quantum computers, that exactly those systems can be broken. So what does it mean? Well, if the beginning of this channel is insecure, then everything that is sent over it is also insecure. So the attacker can afterwards recover everything that was sent, because they can get this initial combination of things. So they can get the mathematical sequence out of it, and there's no more security. Security in the sense of confidentiality. And one really big problem with that is that it's a little bit like a time machine. So today, we believe we don't have a quantum computer that's powerful enough to do this attack. However, we know, at the latest from the Snowden disclosures, but probably every government is doing that, we know that Snowden showed that there is this big program, X-keyscore, to store all kinds of interesting conversation. And what does it mean to be interesting? Well, there are some selectors, and one of the selectors is that it's encrypted. And so encrypted information is going to be stored basically for eternity in, for instance, Bluffdale, Utah, which is one of the big data centers of the NSA. And so that's going to be sitting until one day they can decrypt it. And what's sitting in Bluffdale is the whole conversation. The beginning of what was this handshake, which gets this shared secret, and all the conversation. So if in, say, 2030 or 2035, the NSA has a quantum computer, they can go back to today, the 25th of May, 2023, where there is no quantum computer, and just read what you've been sending. So if by that time your conversation of today is still relevant, meaning still embarrassing to you, gets you in trouble because, say, you're a dissident somewhere and you're saying something government critical, and well, until then, nobody was able to read it, but suddenly somebody can read it, you will still land in jail, or your secret still will be exposed with whatever the consequences are. And so even though you're fine now, where the conversation is held, you will not be fine once quantum computer is there. And so that's the problem we're currently facing, which is, well, basically what I'm losing sleep on.
Thank you. Next, I would like to turn to Ott, and could you talk to us about what obligations do governments have to facilitate the transition to quantum-resistant cryptography?
All right. So, is this one working? No? Is it working now? Yeah. All right. So, Tanja touched a bit on the sort of technical applications of encryption, namely to ensure confidentiality. But from a functional perspective, encryption can be used for various uses. For example, financial transactions, but also to ensure your communications are confidential. So what I researched, what I investigated in a PhD I defended last year, is what obligations governments have in regard to safeguarding encryption, in knowing that quantum computers might be developed in the coming 10 to 15 years, which break current existing encryption cryptography. And I did so on the basis of 3 human rights, namely the right to privacy, obviously, the right to freedom of expression, and thirdly, the right to science, because there's a fundamental right to science, which not many people know of, which in fact protects the right to do science, first of all, and second of all, sharing the results of science. So obviously there's a tension there, because quantum computing is the result of science and requires quite some significant research as well. So the question is, how do you resolve that tension? My conclusion was that governments, on the one hand, have an obligation to reduce the risk of unlawful access to, say, private information or information which is protected by communications confidentiality. But on the other hand, they have also the right, or actually the obligation, to support the development of science and the development of quantum computers. To resolve the tension, I concluded that governments, in fact, have an obligation to develop or invest in the development of post-quantum cryptography algorithms, so algorithms which are resistant to quantum attacks, and invest in the uptake of those algorithms to ensure that they are in fact applied across the board as quickly as possible. Because as Tanja already explained, things can be harvested now, stored for 10 years, and be decrypted later. And as the others will go into in more detail, it takes about 10 to 15 years to transition to new algorithms. So the ones we are currently using, in order to make sure that they are fully replaced by new quantum-resistant algorithms, takes quite a while. Which means that you have to start now to ensure that when the time that quantum computers are available, at least that communication will be protected. All right, so I think one of the open questions then is, what steps do you need to take as a government, as a regulator, as a cybersecurity agency, as a company, to ensure that this transition is being done as quickly as possible? And I think that's something we would like to discuss further. So.
Okay, thank you. And Melissa, could you now talk us about the role of organizations like ANSSI in the EU with regard to post-quantum cryptography?
Sure. Oh, yes, this mic works. So hi, I'm Melissa. Thank you for the invitation in this panel. I indeed work for ANSSI, which is the French cybersecurity agency. But I'm also with a cryptography background. I had a PhD in cryptography and post-quantum crypto. So in ANSSI, the role of government entities like us is very important for the cryptography ecosystem. So in ANSSI, we have a twofold role. The first role is more advisory. We provide recommendation, openly accessible online, with how to have the state-of-the-art cryptography in the products, and what are the state-of-the-art attacks, and how to make sure that any product is secure. We also provide some training so we have a training center. So this is the part where we try to help using state-of-the-art crypto. And on the other hand, we have a regulatory role where we are able to deliver security visa to products. So let's imagine that you're a developer, you have a product and you think it's secure because you have invested a long time to analyze the security. Then you can ask for us, for example, for ANSSI, to analyze the security with the help of evaluation centers and to deliver a certificate saying that this product is compliant with all the state-of-the-art recommendation that we make. And this certificate is gives confidence to the product. So we are also doing that. And so for that, we check that the cryptography inside the product is very compliant with the state-of-the-art, and it would resist to the state-of-the-art attacks. So in that context, so this is the general context about cryptography, and in the context of post-quantum cryptography, so it's also our role to provide recommendations. So for the recommendation part, we published last year a list of recommendations. The main recommendation for now is to remember that the post-quantum cryptography is still not mature enough to be solely ensuring the security. So these algorithms are very interesting, they are researched, but they are very recent, and the cryptanalysis is also recent. And in the cryptography world, young algorithms may also lead to vulnerabilities, because the less time you have to analyze it, the higher the probability to being attacked in the later times. So what we want is algorithms that are well studied and that are old, and this is not the case for post-quantum crypto. So what we recommend is to use post-quantum crypto, but in addition, in hybrid mode with the pre-quantum cryptography. So you use both. You have a product where you have a pre-quantum algorithm, so like Tanja was explaining with RSA or EC something. And then with that, in addition, you add a post-quantum layer. In that case, the attacker will have to break both to enter the system. So it's double protection. And this is what we recommend, we highly recommend if a developer wants to use post-quantum cryptography, is to use both protections. And then after, we also recommend many different, and so we will recommend the algorithms, the specific post-quantum algorithms, and how to use them, and in which settings, in which use cases. So this is we do our best to provide the directions to the developers. And about the certification part, we are also improving and modifying our certification process to be able to certify post-quantum product with post-quantum mitigation inside. So we are now training the evaluation centers and working together to know what are the state-of-the-art attacks, what is the state-of-the-art crypto, what are the best parameters, and so that we can provide certificates certifying that the post-quantum security is indeed there, and it would indeed protect against quantum computer in the future.
Okay, thank you. And Bas, can you talk about practical obstacles that are there for transitioning to quantum-resistant cryptography?
Of course. we've been looking at this Tanja here has been looking at this for over 30 years, but deploying it in practice, we've been looking at this for started looking at this 7 years ago together with Google to see how ready it is to do, just to prepare, right? And it took that long for now that finally we have deployed it, and also Google is putting it into Chrome, not enabled by default, but the code will be there in Chrome mid-July. So this is happening. It's not something that's always 5 years ahead of us. So the difficulties, I have to make explain something technical, another technical complication, because the difficulty is quite different between two pieces of the start of the channel. There's two pieces of cryptography there. There's the key agreement, which is or maybe simpler encryption, which is necessary to protect confidentiality. That's one piece of cryptography. And another piece of cryptography is for the authentication, know who you are talking to. That's digital signatures and certificates. For both of them, we have post-quantum alternatives, and the situation is better for the key agreement than it is with the signatures. With the key agreement, there's Kyber, and when deployed in practice, even if we combine it with classical cryptography, the performance is very good, and the performance impact is quite small. It's not noticeable. That's the good news, although there's a caveat there. The bad news is that with signatures, the post-quantum signatures, we have them. They look good, but they are bigger. They could require more text on the wire. We have to transmit more information, and that looks to be an issue. There will be a noticeable performance impact there, and for us, where it's all in software, it's easier. But this could be very difficult in other applications where hardware needs to be modified or where it's not as easy. With both of them, also with the key agreement, there's the issue that even though the protocols we have designed, they allow for transition, but unfortunately, if a flexibility in a protocol is not used, it turns out that implementations, so people actually writing software, actually creating the hardware, they only test for what's actually used. They don't test if things are a bit different, if things are a bit bigger than expected, and we see that things break. So one of the problems with the key agreement is that the initial message doesn't fit in one little packet anymore. It needs 2 packets, and a part of the internet actually doesn't like that, and there's only so many people we can drop. We can't enable post-quantum cryptography and then drop 1% of all the users of the internet. We can't break 1% of the internet. So there's a difficulty there. We've been talking to vendors which are problematic, and we are trying to get it to work by working around it, by making tweaks. What way requires. So there's this problem. There's this problem here that you have these unexpected difficulties, so you need to start testing early to be in time. So that's what I really want to have it as takeaway. Okay.
Okay, thank you. And could you also tell us what are implementation and security risks?
So it's not just the algorithms themselves, where the question is, are they secure? That's one worry. But another worry is, are they implemented securely? I very much worry about all these new libraries which quickly need to add post-quantum support, and it's not carefully written. And then you can actually create issues not in the cryptography, but in the actual implementation of it. So there's a risk there. Yeah, I think maybe.
Yeah. Would any other panelists like to add to that? Yes.
There is also an issue of when a post-quantum algorithm is implemented in a chip, then some attackers measure the power consumption or the temperature, and this is called the side channel attacks. And these attacks they could be applied to post-quantum cryptography, and for now, the protection against this attack is still a very high research topic, and there is no good solution for that because protecting against that is very expensive. So this is also an issue of what we could risk if these algorithms are implemented in physical, so not on the internet, but in physical chips. And in that case, this is a huge research topic that is not solved now.
Okay, and
Tanja.
okay, Tanja, yes, go ahead, please.
If I may also comment on it, I mean, partially, this is exactly what agencies like ANSSI are addressing by saying, okay, they're training the evaluators to also be able to evaluate post-quantum algorithms. So to understand like where things can go wrong, what you need to test for. So that is exactly to deal with this risk. So Bas is mentioning lots of libraries coming in which are not tested well enough. And yes, in our software world, typically things don't get certified. So the places that take certification very seriously is more in the hardware world, where chip cards come in. But one could, in principle, also imagine, well, certification for software. An intermediate step is formal verification. So you're getting formal methods of what your software is supposed to do, and then you can give a formal proof that the software actually does what it should do, and you can even protect against some implementation difficulties. In part, all of these risks are covered by this belt and suspender technique that Melissa was mentioning, this hybrid systems. So even if the post-quantum system is poorly implemented, as long as the pre-quantum system is still using the OK software, it should be fine, assuming that you did this hybrid combination, this double encryption correctly. And so there are risks, no denying that, but we're typically trying to deploy it in a way that does a double of everything so that the risk is no worse than what we had before, so that you're still having the same security as just with the pre-quantum system where we know it's going to be broken once a quantum computer is there. And then hopefully the post-quantum system adds security to that. And it would be really bad if adding this thing would make it weaker.
Okay, thank you. And another question to all the panelists. How real is the risk posed by quantum computers?
Yeah, so, well, maybe I can start off, and then Tanja, if you want to continue on this. So I think this risk has to do with a couple of factors. First of all, how realistic is it that a quantum computer will be will be developed, which is able to break cryptographic algorithms using a sufficiently large key size. So currently, as far as we know, because we do not know what intelligence agencies are developing, but as far as we know, the quantum computers that are currently being developed are very immature, with a couple of what is called qubits being used to decrypt keys. In order to break a sufficiently large key, you would need approximately 4,000 what is called logical qubits. And because of the error correction involved in quantum computers, that would mean you would need approximately a factor of 1,000 more physical qubits. Currently, the size of quantum computers we currently have is about 100 physical qubits, or maybe a bit more. I do not know the state of the art most recently, but it's to give you an idea. We're still far away from large quantum computers. Still, experts think that these will be developed. So that's the first factor. And then the second factor is you need to actually intercept the communications and being able to store it. Now, only some intelligence agencies will be able to do it. It's not something which private organizations will have access to, or not many at least. You could imagine me sort of putting my antenna in the air and trying to store some of the communication going around here in this particular building, but it would not be global, it would be very local. So And then the third question is, even if you have the data and you have the computer, then do you have the resources or capacity to break these keys? And this is something where I think I would also be interested in hearing the other panelists. In order to break one key with a sufficiently large quantum computer takes some time. So it's something that you cannot sort of easily do and sort of break all the keys at once. So I think especially in the beginning, when the quantum computers are sufficiently large to break keys with a certain size, but they're not really large to do it very quickly, you will probably be selective in which keys you will start breaking. So that's one of the factors limiting the application of quantum computing, at least in the shorter term. Then finally, but again, I would be very interested to hear what the other panelists think. There's a difference in algorithms which use reuse keys, like PGP, which uses one key and uses it all the time, and other algorithms which continuously cycle keys using forward encryption, what's it called? That would be more difficult to decrypt, because you would have to break all those cycled keys, whereas PGP would be a one-time decryption and you would have all the communications available. So again, I would be very interested to hear what the other experts think, but I would think at first the risks are relatively low because of all these limiting factors.
Okay. And
Tanja is
yes.
looking to say
Yes,
something.
so
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, in part, cryptography is always about risk management. Of course, it could be that nobody is listening at this moment, so we don't even need to use encryption. But we do want to use encryption because somebody might be listening. And from what we're seeing with the Snowden revelations, the NSA has the capacity to casually store all kinds of data. Okay, it costs them a 60 megawatt power substation to run Bluffdale, so they built this power substation to run Bluffdale. So it's, to me, this is a reality that all encrypted data is stored there till whenever they can get to it. And then I agree with everything you're saying that some communications are more juicy, more attractive. It's just, we don't know today what will be super interesting in 20 years. Maybe Odd, you'll be running for president, and then suddenly your conversation from 2023 is going to be super interesting because we can figure out all the embarrassing things you said. So just because you're sending something today which you think is uninteresting doesn't mean that it's the interesting target, that it's not the interesting target then. And the normal risk management we have with cryptography is, well, something might break. Somebody might find a better, what Melissa was saying, side channel attack. Okay, those only matter if they can get the activity today. But for everything else, for all the attacks on static data, there is a possibility that somebody could do something better and just break it without a quantum computer. Quantum attacks are a different animal. We have the attack. We just don't have the physical hardware. So normally there might be an attack that runs, and that's the risk. Whereas with the quantum computer, we know there's an algorithm. We just need to watch how the physicists are building it or how the engineers are building it. And yes, you might sleep well on saying, oh, it's just a few hundred qubits that they have at the moment. However, watching the number of qubits is only one of the aspects. What you really need to watch is the stability of these qubits, because you can scale all of those things once these qubits are more stable, because then you need less of this error correction, so its factor of 1,000 will go down. So there are many aspects that come together, and the number of qubits is only one of those. And so to me, this is seeing lots of governments and lots of commercial entities, so IBM, Google, Microsoft, putting a lot of money into building quantum computers. So there I do see that they are making progress. And so to me, it's like, it is a very clear risk on a timeline. We can watch it, and we always know that the spooks will be no worse than what the public has. We don't know how much better they are.
I agree with everything said before. I want to add that if you look at the rough measurements, estimates of progress, this is hard because the exact metrics are difficult. But if you look at some plausible metrics, then still the progress in development of quantum computers is still increasing exponentially. Well, of course, that might slow down because there are bottlenecks or technical problems, or it might speed up. We really don't know. I don't think there will be one in the coming 10 years, personally, but other than that, I don't know. The points Ott makes about the initial period of quantum computers are true, but if progress remains exponential, then those concerns, they will also disappear after a few years, because then quantum computers are so fast that they will break keys very quickly. So it's only transitional patch.
Okay, Melissa, would you like to jump in?
Maybe to conclude about the question. So yes, I don't know either if or when there will be a quantum computer in the future. But the question is not there for us. The question is more the probability is non-zero, and because of the retroactive harvest now, decrypt later attacks, we need to take actions now, long before knowing if or when there will be a quantum computer, because the probability in like 10 years it's non-zero. So we need to take this risk into account because of the retroactive attacks.
So organizations should take action now to start preparing for migration to the PQC.
Yes, organization and companies should start transitioning as soon as possible. So in France, we provide recommendations. So the first recommendation is for the products that will be in use, that will still need long-term protection, security, confidentiality. So, for example, the products that will be in use in 2030 without possibility to be updated. So something that that is sold now and then cannot be updated. In that case, we highly recommend to use hybrid post-quantum cryptography. It's also the case for the products that will not be in use in 2030, but that require protection, confidentiality for more than after 2030. So this is, in these two cases, we highly recommend to use hybrid post-quantum cryptography. For the rest of the commercial product, we encourage to still do this transition, but maybe it's not an absolute requirement. It depends. For example, for Internet of Things, the products that will be that do not protect high secrets and that will be not in use in like 1 or 2 years. Maybe it's not an absolute requisites.
Okay, thank you. And now we can open the floor for the questions from the audience. Does anybody want to ask a question? Yes, please, if you could go to, and if you could present yourself also.
Sure. Mic check 1, 2. Thank you very much for this panel. My name is CPDP, and I'm a senior research analyst at Trilateral Research. We sometimes do projects from the area of security, and sometimes we've encountered the quantum element being weaved into the research programs of the Commission. My question is about the possibility of quantum computing, of the attack that was described by the organized crime groups, because we've discussed this in the context of intelligence agencies that have a lot of infrastructure and so on. We think about private companies, but what is realistically the chance that organized crime groups could, after getting some data from the darknet that is encrypted, have access to the hardware, software ability to use the right setup to essentially break the traditional encryption. If, let's imagine a scenario, if there is a big news like, the attack was successful, we have a proof of concept. Should we be concerned about organized crime groups getting hands on that tech, or is it the case that they wouldn't really be able to, and we can sleep semi-safely? So that's the question.
Yes, who would like to take this question? Yes.
Yeah, so the quantum computer, there already exist quantum computers now, they're just not big enough. And the quantum computers that exist already, you can all rent time on them in the cloud. So it's time sharing, and I expect that when quantum computers arrive, there will be a huge investment in them already. So they want to recoup the investment, and one of them is just rent some time on a quantum computer. And it's good to note that quantum computers aren't just for breaking cryptography. They can also solve actual interesting problems like simulating materials, that kind of stuff. So I very much expect there will be access just by renting in the cloud, quantum computer as a service. Yeah.
Within crime as a service environment, for example. Huh?
Yeah, just rent a quantum computer at Amazon. That will happen. Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
But still, I would think that there's no good reason to allow private use of quantum computers for decryption purposes. Government use under certain safeguards, perhaps, but private use not. Tanja does not agree.
How do you distinguish this? I mean, if there's a service on Amazon, I mean, you claim this as a physics simulation. How can anybody distinguish that?
Yeah, that's something I was wondering as well. Is it not possible to identify that you're using Shor's algorithm or whatever?
No, there are ways to hide what you're doing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, then enforcement is an issue.
Slightly concerned.
And of course, so to comment on the other point, I mean, Ott was saying that he is a private person and even organized crime couldn't probably siphon off the data to the same level that government agencies can. But we've had other data being exfiltrated from government agencies. And so those are the whistleblowers who want those data to be leaked. You could just as well imagine one of the organized crime people infiltrating and then exfiltrating for their nefarious purposes and taking other kinds of data. So, of course, I hope that the NSA has the data centers secure, but they weren't so sure about other data. So I think we need to rely on the crypto being strong rather than on the organized crime not having the ability to get the data.
Thank you very much.
Okay, and we have another question.
Thanks a lot for the panel. I'm Rutger Boga from Fraunhofer Research Institute in Karlsruhe based. I would like to ask, so you said it would be best that organizations would use both classic crypto and post-quantum crypto to be safe for the future. But as far as I understood, this is not well researched and not really final yet. So I imagine that this would also make organizations change their processes, would occur new costs and be pretty complicated. So could you maybe give an insight into the costs that are connected with this kind of hybrid crypto processes?
Sure. So this technique of combining two, so pre-quantum and post-quantum, it relies on simple cryptography bricks like hash functions and XORs or things like that. And so these modes are and will be standardized by different standardization agencies like ANSSI. NIST is also standardizing one hybrid mode. And so these standards will be openly accessible and could be used by entities. Of course, it costs to transition towards post-quantum cryptography. Even if we would like, that would not be recommended, but drop-in replacement. And I think the extra costs, both in terms of performance and in terms of research costs, is limited to the cost of having both, so hybrid, is limited compared to the cost of drop-in replacement, because it's just adding one small layer of pre-quantum cryptography and just one or two hash functions. So that's okay, and that provides a very higher level of security. So it's highly recommended.
And you say that the cybersecurity institutions in the EU already provide guidance on how to
yes,
do it?
so in France, yes, and also the BSI also provides recommendations. There are open recommendation and standards that will be published. But it's true that it's a research topic, and there's still more research needed for these.
Very interesting. Thanks a lot.
Yes, and also the EU Cybersecurity Agency, ANSSI, has also published 2 studies on that. Yes, and we have another question, please.
Hi, my name is Clara. I'm from the Information Commissioner's Office. So I was very interested in the idea that of the ANSSI guidelines around expecting how long a product might last without an update and kind of incorporating these techniques. But thinking about the idea that encrypted chats or encrypted documents are captured and waiting until they can be decrypted. I wonder if you've done any work or you're planning on doing work around not so much protecting the product, but protecting the data that might be generated in all sorts of very normal kind of consumer products, and how you can bring in the post-quantum stuff. So you mentioned that you're kind of recommending it, but you're not pushing it yet for these products, and I wondered when you might start thinking about doing that.
Yes, so there were two points. The first one was when the product will still be in use and cannot be updated. And the other point is that that data needed confidentiality for more than 2030. So I suppose, for example, in chats where the data is not really deleted or securely deleted, this would fall into the recommendation of transition toward hybrid post-quantum cryptography. So yeah, if the data sticks somewhere, it's better to use a hybrid post-quantum cryptography.
So does that mean that services that provide backup for consumers, where the lifetime of that consumer, they can see that many of their consumers stay with them for longer than 10 years, they would be expected also to already be implementing post-quantum?
I think so. So it's difficult because it depends on the crypto that is used for encrypted the backups, because there it's not asymmetric crypto. So this cannot be attacked by by quantum algorithm. But if there is some way to recover the key that was used to encrypt the database, I don't know if the exchange was backup somewhere, then in that case, yes. But it's difficult. It depends on the system.
Okay, please.
Hello, I'm Jessica Schröss from the Center for IT and IP Law from Eindhoven. And I just want to quickly ask, because you also mentioned post-quantum signatures. And I was wondering there, the storage problem, I don't immediately see it. So is it something that we already need to worry about at the moment? Or?
Yeah, the signature. You want to answer, maybe?
Yeah, so if you make a connection to a website now, there's not just the certificates, there's also SCTs from certificate transparency, and you're looking at about 6 signatures and 3 public keys. And the lithium has 2.5 kilobyte signatures, 1.5 kilobyte public keys. So well, that's quite a bit extra.
Yeah, but is it worth to worry about it right now? Because that's in the public. It's in 10 years the certificate will not be valid
but
anymore.
Things move. Perhaps things will move faster, and deploying something where on the public internet where everyone has to change its certificate authorities, its web browsers, it's all the people, its mailboxes. It will be very slow to change. So we have to start thinking and planning this now. We can't just wait.
More the implementation, long time.
Yes, it's much harder to do than key. Already with key agreement, it took years, right? And signatures will be worse.
Good. Thank you very much.
There is also the setting of document signatures, which is a bit different than authentication. So maybe it's a bit more rare, but sometimes we have to store a signed document for a long time, and it needs to be valid for like 10 years. It happens.
I was just indeed, but then a certificate is only valid until 10 years. So if the quantum cryptography will be after 10 years, then you anyway need to find the archiving or renewing validation of the solution. So then in 10 years you can maybe use it, but right now it wouldn't make sense if you're not sure that within 10 years.
Yeah, it
That's gonna be a
depends.
problem.
Because there are some times where we need more than 10 years. So
Yeah. No,
depends.
yeah. No, thank you very much.
Okay.
Maybe Tanja was.
Yes, please.
If I may add a little bit. So in general, yes, I agree that with signatures, we are less in a rush because we don't have this time machine aspect. However, when do you switch? So there's the aspect that Bas mentioned, that switching takes a long time, but you might still get like, okay, we get a warning because we know 5 years before the quantum computer is there. But we don't actually know when the quantum computer will be there. There was not going to be a front page article in the New York Times. And there are products which are out for longer than 5 years that need to be updated at that point. And the issue is when you look at operating system updates, say you're buying a car. You shouldn't because environment, but let's assume you're buying a car, you expect this thing to drive for 20, 25 years. And modern cars get updates to their system. And these updates have to be secured somehow. And this is one of the places where I think we need to deploy post-quantum signatures now, because during those 25 years, there's a significant chance that the quantum computer will be there, so that at some point, somebody with a quantum computer could send a fake update, and that fake update disables your brake and you crash into something. So there are situations, there are scenarios where you actually today put the software on the system, and then the update mechanism needs to be secured post-quantumly. So there are systems where you want a signature now. If you have a certificate validity period for 10 years, it's probably okay today. But the question is simply, when do you say, is day X, which is, less than 10 years from when a quantum computer is there? And that is an uncomfortable place. Plus, testing, etc., need some time. So
Okay.
I'd like to see it sooner than later.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions from the audience? No? Then I would like to ask another question, to pose another question to the panelists about the governance of this transition. Some countries have had a rather steady agenda of transitioning to the post-quantum cryptography, and for instance, in the United States, a law has been adopted recently, the so-called Quantum Computing Cybersecurity Preparedness Act, which obliges federal agencies to develop a plan of migration to post-quantum cryptography of their information technology. So do the panelists think that in the EU there should be also some kind of laws at the EU level? Who would like to take this question?
Yeah, maybe I can kick off. Currently under EU law, there are various obligations to take security measures, right? Under the GDPR to secure personal data, under NIS2 to secure critical infrastructure, under e-communications, under e-privacy to take security measures, communications code to take security measures. These are all open norms, so you need to take appropriate technical and organizational measures. And the question is, how do you then sort of interpret this openness? And I would be in favor of the relevant regulators, either the data protection authorities or other organizations responsible for supervising their respective domains, to actually clarify or make explicit that knowing that quantum computers will be developed in the coming years, in say 1 or 2 years, as soon as sort of this technology is practically applicable and useful, you need to switch. That appropriateness of security measures means in practice that you need to switch to PQC algorithms, potentially in a hybrid fashion.
Yes, okay. And Tanja, what is your stance on regarding?
So, I would like to see such regulations, yes. On the other hand, the EU countries all have sovereignty over what encryption the agencies mandate. And so bigger countries, in particular Germany and France, who have good, well-established, with strong researchers, etc., agencies, for instance, Melissa at ANSSI or a group of Germans working for the BSI, they say, no, we have the expertise in-house, do not regulate us. We have sovereignty to make this. And so they have so far been sort of boycotting, to say it negatively, any movements by ENISA to regulate this or to make recommendations. So there is no European standardization body, there's no body that could say you must use that system. I do believe it's possible that there could be some regulations saying, okay, well, with GDPR, you must ensure security for X years. And we expect some quantum computer before that, so that the implication becomes that you must do post-quantum crypto. But I don't see the regulation, a possibility for such regulations going like, and you must use algorithm X for this one and algorithm Y for that one.
Okay, Melissa?
Yeah, that's far beyond my my expertise. I'm in the research lab, so I have no idea about such.
But would you like to see any kind of regulation at the EU level?
I don't know. Well, we already do that. It's true in France. So I don't know for the rest if we can, if it's the same or negotiate.
But are these recommendations followed up, or do they have binding effect?
You mean in France or in Europe? Oh yeah, in France the recommendations, our recommendations are quite the standards that are used by developers who want to design security products. But it's true that we try to have a harmonized, but for now recommendation, not like regulation. We have a group of all the European countries, and we try to have a harmonized evaluation scheme and harmonized recommendations. So there is these projects, and it will be the case for post-quantum cryptography to have public European recommendations. But yeah, for the law and enforcement, I don't know.
Yes, okay.
I have no idea.
And Bas, like the industry side?
Well, so the US government, they announced that they will not buy any software or hardware after 2033, which is not post-quantum secure. And that seems to get quite a lot of interest from companies because there's an opportunity here. Yeah. So I think something like this announcement within the EU, setting a timeline after which at least the government doesn't accept any non-post-quantum software and hardware anymore, that would be great.
Okay, thank you. And another question which would be also interesting to discuss is the governance of standardization efforts. Now the major process there is under the auspices of the US National Institute of Standardization and Technology. But in terms of sovereignty and independency, for instance, it's very interesting that the German Cybersecurity Authority, BSI, has stated that it welcomes the NIST process as a method of defining standards in a transparent international process that can be then used worldwide. And it is particularly opposed to a separate process for standardizing German or European algorithms. So explaining that a proliferation of international standards would both hamper interoperability and reduce the market opportunities of crypto producers. In addition, a splitting of personnel and research resources would lead to a lower evaluation quality for those algorithms that are ultimately selected. So is this the right approach? Yes, please. Yes, please, Tanja.
Maybe I can jump in. I think it's important for context to understand how these processes work. So NIST is, already mentioned this US entity, yes. And they made a public call for submissions where anybody in the world could submit. So in the end, they had 69 submissions from teams, many of them multinational, lots of them including researchers and industry collaborators, etc. So this then was a very visible process. Lots of people were trying to attack systems, lots of people were trying to implement systems to become faster. I mean, when you make a competition, people will compete. So that's the benefit. And you can win the competition by having a good entry, and you can win the competition by breaking the others. So we were all very motivated to do something. There have been in parallel a much, much smaller, shorter competition by the Chinese. And I think one has to see the comment by the BSI in context of this Chinese competition. So the Chinese competition, there wasn't much news about it other than like, oh, the Chinese are running competition. What are the entrance criteria? Oh, your entrance criterion is you must have at least a Chinese on the team. So not just that it was run by the Chinese in China, but also that you have a restricted set of competitors, which sort of says must be made here. And yes, there are cryptographers in Germany, there are cryptographers in France. You could have a French competition and a German competition, but then you wouldn't have the same systems there. And in the end, you want that Alice and Bob can talk to one another. I mean, it sort of makes sense for China because they don't want communication with the outside world as much, and they in particular don't want their citizens to communicate encryptedly with anybody outside. So maybe it makes sense there to have something, and maybe it even makes sense there to have it not so secure for the government. But for the rest of the world, where we actually would like to have the communication encrypted and secured with the best mechanisms, it is important to have everybody be allowed to compete, and not a submission regulated by the nationality of the submitters. And it wasn't even clear whether it was the nationality of the submitters or the affiliation of the submitters. One would need to read the fine print in Chinese, which I didn't bother to ask Google Translate about. And so I can totally understand that the Germans say, no, we don't want to do that. But they are doing different recommendations. So the German BSI has been putting out recommendations of what they recommend people use, predating the NIST decisions, and also not exactly the same as the NIST submissions. So the BSI is recommending Frodo and McLeese for encryption, and neither of those at the moment is recommended by NIST. So they're not saying that they will take over exactly the results of NIST. However, they're building onto the process of evaluation with NIST. So both Frodo and McLeese were in the process. McLeese is still in the process. So all the public evaluations helped in coming up with these recommendations. And it sounds like they will also amend the recommendations to include cargo.
Okay, and Bas?
Quite often people say, "Oh, it's the NIST, the Americans selected it." But if you look at the people involved, if you look at all the submissions, and if you look at the designers, the submitters on all of the ones that got picked, I'd say it's closer to a European standard than to an American standard, even though it will get the American certificate on top of it. Just something to mention. Of course, there's,
Yes.
Just to
Melissa, yes.
We are pretty aligned with what Tanja said, and we are aligned with the BSI. The idea that the NIST competition has been a catalyst that has helped the community to focus on a restricted number of algorithms, and this was very beneficial for the research and for the community. And the choices, we are happy with the choices of the NIST, and we include the choice of NIST in our recommendations, but we still think that it's possible for us to make a slight modification or add schemes that were not selected by NIST in our recommendations. We just use the NIST as a basis for our recommendations, and it's very useful, and it's a very sane way of selecting cryptographic algorithm, I think.
Yes, and Odd, would you like to add something to that?
Yeah, so I'm wondering if you zoom out a bit and take a more longer-term perspective, is it perhaps even as important to emphasize what is called cryptographic agility, so the possibility to drop in certain algorithms after easily after you've noticed that they've become vulnerable, even more important perhaps than the algorithms themselves, or do you then sort of open up another attack avenue? That's something I would be interested to hear from the others.
I'm happy to take that.
Yes, please.
So I'm trying to avoid this term cryptographic agility because, I mean, yes, it sounds fashionable. Agility is a good thing in general. But unfortunately, there are two different things that people mean when they talk about it. One is sort of what you just explained, so that you have a switch from one system to a different system, so I have a drop in. And you could say, okay, you're speaking version 1. Oh, version 1 has some issues. We're now all switching to version 2. But cryptographic agility is also used when you have what is called a version negotiation or a system negotiation. So you have a system where you have a laundry list of things, or more like in English it's called a Chinese menu. You're picking one of these, one of those, one of those. Like you're going to one of those quick wok restaurants and you're picking a protein, you're picking 2 vegetables, and you're picking a sauce with it. And so when you allow this negotiation, then there's always this concern that an attacker might push you to the weakest choice in each of the categories. And so if cryptographic agility is meant as this negotiation part, we have seen lots of what's called downgrade attacks. And you also sometimes see downgrade attacks even in this version switch if the old versions are still maintained. So I think it's important to design crypto systems so that you can switch out one piece and plug in another. But it is important that the choice is kind of mandated of what gets used, so that everybody is using the same system at the same time and not having a stronger and a weaker version. We've seen this in TLS, that there's still this opportunity of having different sizes, different versions. It was much worse in the previous TLS versions, and there we saw a lot of these downgrade attacks. So yes, there is the risk of enabling attacks that weren't there before.
Okay, thank you. Would you like to add to that? No.
Yeah, I completely agree here. A little bit of agility is required to actually upgrade things in practice, because we can't upgrade everything all at once, but we should be really disciplined about it, at least in the protocol design. So that's from a technical perspective. But as a company, it's if you have vendors, you should ask them, how easy is it for you to switch out the cryptography to something else? But that's more on, do you still have the people on board who designed it? Does the vendor still exist that designed that kind of agility, which is a bit out of my field, but that kind of agility, having the possibility to actually change the thing that's been written 10 years ago, that's important for a different side of agility. Yeah.
And there is also the issue of the certifying the product. If we certify a product with a certain cryptography inside, what happens if the cryptography algorithm is changed? Then the certificate does not apply anymore. And so this is also a part that we are discussing, and it's difficult because it does not exactly fit with the scheme of certifying products for now.
Okay, thank you. And what are the costs of migrating to post-quantum cryptography?
Difficult to assess, I don't know.
Yeah, this is where you give the typical lawyer answer. It depends. It's complicated. So if you have a software system, it's typically not so bad. You need to have some developers. As Bas was just saying, it depends a lot on whether you still have the people on board who know the code, or whether you're using somebody else's product and to ask that other person to please help you. But in general, software, you can switch from one day to the other. If you have changes to hardware, or if you have hard to reach software, I mentioned this example of cars. I mean, it is a much, much higher cost if you have to have each car come to the station, like the repair shop, and get an upgrade. Some cars can get upgrades over the years, but most you would need to have like a physical thing plugged in. And so you're talking about a large time frame in addition to the developer costs. So it really depends on what the situation is, what you're trying to upgrade. And then you have the older systems that you can't upgrade at all. I mean, Melissa mentioned IoT as something where it's maybe not so necessary. On the other hand, we have like the very old IoT systems, which unfortunately are still running and sometimes being used for botnet attacks. And so there's a lot of stuff which is not upgradable. And basically the cost is to convince the person who bought a smart toaster 5 years ago that they need to buy a new smart toaster and invest in that, because else there's still going to be a smart toaster online which has old crypto and is vulnerable. Maybe you don't care about the smart toaster, but if the smart toaster can be the entrance vector to your home internet, it's a problem.
Thank you. And but from a company perspective, when company is set to migrate to the PQC.
Yes. So we have migrated on the outside. Internally, we are migrating now. We're in the process of, and we have a few. So I'm working full time on this, but it's not just me. I can't go in and change every one of the thousands of software packages we have. So every single team of programmers we have, at some point during the next year, they will work on this for a few days to upgrade their software and test it and see whether it broke and babysit it during the upgrade. And I don't want to give an estimate, but it will be I'm pretty sure it will be at least 1% of our engineers' time the coming year, if not more. So it's a non-negligible amount of time. And it's not because the changes are that difficult, it's just that it touches a lot of the things. Yeah. And we still have it easy because we have most of our software is in-house. Practically all of it is in-house. If we the more normal situation is that you have a lot of software buy it from vendors or hardware from vendors, and you have to have them upgrade perhaps first. So that's a lot of time and planning. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So any more questions from the audience? No. So at this point we can round off this discussion. Thank you very much. I would like to thank the panelists for their interventions and also for the audience for being here with us today.